Well, here we are in Exploring Monastic Life, and we've been talking about afflictions and liberation and all this and that. And I'm kind of wondering, how do you know that you can change your mind? What's the basis on that this is even possible? So I find this helpful to think about. Actually, even this morning, I found it helpful to think about to change my state of mind. And so I've been thinking about this from a book from His Holiness, and he explains that there's two propositions that we can base this upon: the ability to do mental transformation or mind transformation. And so I'm just going to talk about one of them today, and that's the law of impermanence. So all things are subject to transformation and change. All things. Really, it's impermanent things, because there are permanent things too, but all the events and the functioning things you see around you, your mind, your body, this stuff, all of this is changing all the time. And so we're quite aware of this, even though we think we're the same person we were yesterday, and even though we have all these thoughts that run contrary to that, we also have, we know this from our own experience that, our cars break down, like we were just talking about, the sun sets. We know this from our own experience that things change. But we don't always think about it, those large changes they call gross impermanence, that we're quite aware of. But if we think about it a little bit more, for that to be possible, there would have to be change that's happening more subtly, moment to moment. Like the sun doesn't go down just because it went from one side to the other. It moves all day long, right? It's moving continuously. So in the same way, things are changing moment by moment, events, our bodies, our minds, everything. And even this we intellectually understand because we have such a good educational system. Most of us here probably had the opportunity to look through microscopes, or we've been introduced to things like electrons and neutrons and how subatomic particles whirl around constantly, things like that. So intellectually we understand that, but we haven't always understood this next point. I sure didn't until being taught this, that this transient and impermanent nature of reality of these kind of objects doesn't mean that something comes into being and then abides for a while and then ceases to exist. It doesn't really mean that. That's not the subtle level of impermanence. The subtle level actually means that things come into existence, and the moment they come into existence, they're already falling apart. They're already impermanent. They're already decaying. So that process of disintegration has already begun. So it's essentially, you could say, it's born along with it. When it arises, it's also disintegrating. So, and it's also, and this is really, sometimes you really have to think about this one, it's not that there's some third factor that comes in and makes it change. That's more like a gross impermanence, like, you light the fire, the wood burns, it's gone. You had this factor of lighting the match and burning the wood or the paper or whatever. For subtle impermanence, it's not like that. It doesn't need an outside factor. So His Holiness is saying that if you limit your understanding of impermanence to thinking like there's just this continuum, then if you only think that way, like it's arising, abiding, and ceasing, and it has this continuum, then you'll only ever really understand gross impermanence. And then you'll always give rise to this idea that when something arises, it remains unchanged. And that as long as the factors that keep it from changing aren't there, it's going to stay the same. And it only starts to disintegrate when something adverse happens. That's kind of how we feel a lot of times. But that's only kind of a gross level of impermanence. We have to understand this more subtle level. And then we can see how moment to moment, anything we're experiencing, it's like you can't even make it stay the same. Try to have a thought that you can hold on to for, try to concentrate. Try to put your mind single-pointedly on your breath or whatever your object is. And you can, really hard to do. Things are changing all the time. So this is one fundamental law, this transient nature of phenomena, that is one basis for the possibility of transforming our minds. And so for me, when he explains that, what comes up for me are things like what I said the other day. You might have the notion when you're dealing with something like, that's just the way I am. Or you might think things like, this will never change. We have these kind of emotional responses or thoughts. Or why bother? It's always like this. These are the ways that, like even this morning when I was upset about something, couldn't find something, da da da. Then I'm preparing this talk and I'm thinking, this is going to change. I don't have to hold on to this. Even that, just thinking about it helps. Because we have these kind of notions, we always have this like distortion that things are permanent. But you can use this kind of thought to kind of break this down. And then when you can change those thoughts, you don't have to suffer from these repeated thoughts that bring up emotions that are disturbing. That's how I see it. And so then His Holiness goes on to explain that in the Tibetan language, the word for dharma is chur, and that has this connotation of changing or bringing about transformation. So what we're doing when we talk about transforming our mind is we're actually referring to this, like guiding our mind with the help of the Dharma teachings to like figure out what to adopt and what to abandon so that we can enhance our good qualities and get rid of our unwholesome qualities. And that way we're actually using this law of impermanence, but we're using it in like a guided fashion to take advantage of this is how things work, and doing it in a way that helps us to have more peace of mind and more qualities where we can be of benefit to others and just even get along more easily with others in our day. So that's part one.